When Lisa moved into her new apartment, it seemed perfect. Affordable rent, a quiet neighborhood, and just far enough from the city to enjoy some peace. The only odd thing was the neighbor across the hall, an older woman, Mrs. Beckett, who eyed her with curiosity when she first arrived. "You'll be fine here," she had said, almost too dismissively. Lisa brushed it off, chalking it up to small-town eccentricity. For the first few weeks, everything was uneventful. Lisa worked late and often returned home exhausted, collapsing into bed. But soon, small oddities crept in. At night, she'd hear faint creaking coming from the hallway. She assumed it was just the old building settling, but the noise became more distinct, like footsteps shuffling just outside her door. Once, she thought she heard the faint sound of breathing. One evening, while watching TV, the lights flickered, briefly plunging the room into darkness. When the power returned, the door to her bedroom was ajar, even though she distinctly remembered closing it. Dismissing it as her mind playing tricks on her, Lisa tried to convince herself nothing was wrong. A few nights later, she woke suddenly to the sound of her front door rattling. It was as though someone was trying to turn the doorknob from the other side. She sat up, heart racing, and listened. The sound stopped. Lisa grabbed her phone, ready to call the police, but after a few minutes of silence, she talked herself out of it. The next morning, she mentioned the incident to Mrs. Beckett in passing. The old woman froze, her face paling. "You heard it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Heard what?" "That thing. It's been in this building for years." Lisa laughed nervously, thinking it was some urban legend. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Beckett's eyes were wide with fear. "You're not the first. The tenant before you left suddenly. They never told you, did they? Strange things happen in that apartment. It's why the rent's so low." That night, Lisa locked every door and window in her apartment, setting her phone on the bedside table, just in case. Sleep came fitfully. At around 3 a.m., she was jolted awake by the feeling of pressure on her chest, as though something, or someone, was sitting on her. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of an intruder, but all she saw were shifting shadows on the walls. Suddenly the pressure lifted, and she gasped for breath. She turned on the bedside lamp, and as the light flickered to life, she noticed something horrifying. There were indentations on the foot of her bed, as though someone had been sitting there moments before. Lisa didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The following day, she packed a bag and left, abandoning the apartment for good. When she tried to contact the landlord about breaking the lease, the phone went straight to voicemail. She never received a response. Lisa never found out what was haunting the apartment, but whatever it was, it felt too real to ignore. And she wasn't about to stay and find out. When Matt and his family moved to a quiet rural town, they thought they had found their perfect home. Their new farmhouse was surrounded by open fields, with an old abandoned barn standing at the edge of the property. At first, everything seemed peaceful, but after a few months, strange things started happening. One evening, while Matt worked late in his home office, he glanced out the window and saw a figure standing near the barn. It was too dark to see details, but the figure was tall and unmoving, watching the house. When Matt looked again, it was gone, slipping into the shadows. He dismissed it as a trick of the light. But the next evening, the figure was back, again standing near the barn, staring at the house. This time, Matt went outside, calling out, but no one answered. By the time he reached the barn, it was empty. The figure seemed to vanish without a trace, leaving Matt unsettled. He didn't tell Sarah, his wife, thinking it was nothing. A few days later, Sarah mentioned seeing someone by the barn early in the morning. Matt's heart sank. He hadn't imagined it. They considered calling the police, but what could they say? Someone was just standing outside, not trespassing or causing harm. They decided to ignore it. One night, Matt woke to the sound of rustling outside. When he looked out the window, The figure was standing at the edge of their yard, closer than ever. Matt grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, determined to confront whoever was out there. But by the time he reached the yard, the figure had disappeared into the darkness, leaving only faint impressions in the grass. From then on, Matt felt constantly watched. Whether he was outside working in the yard or sitting inside the house, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from the fields. It became an oppressive presence. Things escalated when their young daughter, Lily, came inside one afternoon, pale and frightened. "Daddy, there's a man by the barn," she whispered. Matt's stomach twisted. He rushed outside, but the figure had already vanished as always. The final straw came when they started hearing noises from the barn at night. Faint, unsettling sounds like someone moving inside. Matt couldn't ignore it any longer. One night, flashlight in hand, he walked to the barn. Inside, the smell of damp wood and old hay filled the air. The barn seemed empty, but then he heard footsteps above him, slow, heavy steps from the loft. His heart pounded as he aimed the flashlight upwards, but nothing was there. Panicked, Matt backed out of the barn. As soon as he stepped outside, the footsteps stopped. That night, he and Sarah decided they had to leave. They couldn't stay in a place where something, or someone, was always watching them. A week later, they packed up and moved. After they left, Matt learned that the previous owners had left suddenly, just like them. No one ever stayed in the house for long, and the barn had been abandoned for decades. Whatever had been watching them had been there long before they arrived, and would likely still be there, watching, long after they were gone. When Emma and Ben bought their first home, it seemed like a dream. The townhouse had charm, original wood floors, high ceilings, and plenty of space. The only odd thing was the third-floor room. The door was padlocked, and when Emma asked about it, the realtor shrugged. The previous owners never used it. Probably just storage, he said. At first, they didn't think much of it. They had plenty of space and no immediate need for the room. But after a few weeks, strange things started happening. It began with noises, soft creaks and thuds from the third floor. Emma dismissed them at first, thinking it was the house settling. But the sounds soon became more distinct, like footsteps pacing back and forth. One night, while watching TV, a loud bang echoed from above. Both Emma and Ben froze. "That came from upstairs," Ben muttered. They checked the third floor, but the door was still locked. Everything seemed normal. They brushed it off, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The noises continued, growing louder with each passing night. Footsteps followed by faint scratching sounds, as though something was trying to escape. Emma avoided the top floor, feeling a creeping dread whenever she passed the locked door. One evening, after another loud thud, Ben decided to break the lock. Armed with a crowbar, he made his way up to the third floor. The air felt colder, heavier. He pried open the padlock, and the door creaked as it swung open. The room was dark and empty, covered in dust. The air smelled faintly rotten. In the center of the room, a dark, damp patch marred the floorboards. Emma knelt down to touch it, but recoiled as the wood felt sticky. "I don't like this," she whispered. They shut the door quickly and locked it again, hoping the noises would stop. But they didn't. That night, the sounds intensified. Footsteps pounded above their heads, and something heavy dragged across the floor. Emma lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart racing. The next morning, they found fresh footprints in the dust outside the third-floor door. Emma's stomach churned. The door was still locked, but something, or someone, had been standing there. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the house grew oppressive. Emma felt watched, even during the day. Shadows seemed to move just out of sight, and cold drafts swept through the rooms without explanation. Every time she passed the stairs, she felt a chill. One night, Emma woke to a soft tapping sound coming from the bedroom window. Their bedroom was on the second floor. No one should have been able to reach the window. Slowly, she turned her head and froze. A dark figure stood outside the glass, its outline human, but unnaturally still. Emma gasped, paralyzed with fear. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. When she told Ben, he found nothing outside. No sign anyone had been there. The next day, Emma did some research on the house. She discovered that several previous owners had moved out abruptly, all after experiencing strange occurrences. None had stayed long enough to explain why, but the pattern was clear. Something in that house drove people away. That evening, Emma and Ben packed their things and left. They didn't talk about it, but both knew they couldn't stay. As they drove away, Emma glanced back at the house. For a split second, she thought she saw something standing in the window watching them leave. They never returned.
Thanks for watching the video. We hope you enjoyed the journey. If you loved the twists and turns, don't forget to hit the like button and share the stories with your friends. Make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling tale, because there's always a new mystery or adventure just around the corner. Until next time, keep imagining, keep exploring, and remember, nothing is ever quite what it seems.